Hello, friends, and welcome back to Scholastically Natalie, where we're going to read Going to Meet the Man by James Baldwin. This is probably going to be the first video that I mark as mature, 18 plus, age restrict, because this short story is exceedingly explicit, and I really don't want anybody who might just be listening to a playlist to pass the time, or just be letting their recommended play. I don't want anybody to walk into this unaware. I know I do that. I let videos play in the background, and I think if I had randomly gotten somebody reading Going to Meet the Man to me without warning, I probably would be a little bit upset, or at the very least taken aback. So, as same as last time, we are using the Norton Anthology of American Literature, the 9th edition, aka Literature since 1945, because I've been forced to buy every single one of the Norton anthologies, I'm pretty sure. So, what is Going to Meet the Man about, and who is James Baldwin, etc. So, this is a quote from the introduction of James Baldwin on page 391 to 392. His essays on the experience of being black in the United States and in post-war Europe had already established him as a serious thinker about race. In one of his essays, he analyzed religion's relationship to race as well as the fraught psychology of black-white relations in America, using terms that explored the sexualized emotional dependency of white America on black inferiority. This is also something he explores in Going to Meet the Man. Okay, so here's your warning. Again. So, in this, Baldwin dares to write from the perspective of a white deputy sheriff and his young son, and thus to fully engage the horror of lynching. Baldwin shocks the reader with racist language and sexualized violence, while showing how easily a young boy becomes complicit with a racist culture. So there's explicit mentions of racist violence, sexual assault, regular sex between two consulting parties, and a lot of language. Now, I will not be saying words that I know are slurs and derogatory. I'll just be saying blank in their place, and I'm going to warn you there's probably going to be a lot of blanks, because again, this is written from a very racist perspective. So, let's begin. Yeah, then we get this one. Okay, so, what's the matter, she asked. I don't know, he said, trying to laugh. I guess I'm tired. You've been working too hard, she said. I keep telling you. Well, God damn it, woman, he said. It's not my fault. He tried again. He wretchedly failed again. Then he just lay there, silent, angry, and helpless. Excitement filled him like a toothache, but it refused to enter his flesh. He stroked her breast. This was his wife. He could not ask her to do just a little thing for him, just to help him out, just for a little while, the way he could ask a blank girl to do it. He lay there and he sighed. The image of a black girl caused a distant excitement in him, like a faraway light, but, again, the excitement was more like pain. Instead of forcing him to act, it made action impossible. So here we're already kind of tying intrinsically the black existence to, sexuality, which is, again, strange, but here he's consciously recognizing that the way he treats his wife as a partner is vastly different from how he would treat a black woman as a partner, which, again, I don't know if we could use the term partner for that, but we're gonna move on. Go to sleep, she said gently. You got a hard day tomorrow. Yeah, he said, and rolled over on his side, facing her, one hand still on one breast. Goddamn the blanks. The black stinking blanks. You'd think they'd learn. Wouldn't you think they'd learn? I mean, wouldn't you? They're going to be out there tomorrow, she said, and took his hand away. Get some sleep. He lay there, one hand between his legs, staring at the frail sanctuary of his wife. A faint light came from the shutters. The moon was full. Two dogs, far away, were barking at each other, back and forth, insistently, as though they were agreeing to make an appointment. I like this detail because it's just such a stretch of normalcy in such a strange piece. He heard a car coming north on the road, and he half sat up, his hand reaching for his holster, which was on a chair near the bed, on top of his pants. The lights hit the shutters and seemed to travel across the room and then went out. The sound of the car slipped away. He heard it hit gravel, then heard it no more. Some liver-lipped students, probably heading back to that college, but coming from where? His watch said it was 2 in the morning. They could be coming from anywhere, from out of state most likely, and they would be at the courthouse tomorrow. The Blanks were getting ready. Well, they would be ready too. He moaned. He wanted to let whatever was in him out, but it wouldn't come out. God damn, he said aloud, and turned again, on his side, away from Grace, staring at the shutters. He was a big, healthy man, and he had never had any trouble sleeping, and he wasn't old enough yet to have any trouble getting it up. He was only 42. And he was a good man, a God-fearing man. He had tried to do his duty all his life, and he had been a deputy sheriff for several years. Nothing had ever bothered him before, certainly not getting it up. Sometimes, sure, like any other man, he knew that he wanted a little more spice than Grace could give him, and he would drive over yonder and pick up a black piece, or arrest her, it came to the same thing, but he couldn't do that now, no more. So here we're explicitly saying that although the expectation of society is for these men to be content in their white marriage to their white wife because they are superior, we're seeing instead that they prefer to exert dominance over black women because they find it more exciting. And so that kind of ties together the thought of dominance over somebody else being the pleasure itself. There was no telling what might happen once your ass was in the air, and they were low enough to kill a man then, too. Every one of them, or the girl herself might do it. Right when she was making believe he made her feel so good, the Blanks. What did the good Lord Almighty had in mind when he made the Blanks? Well, they were pretty good at that, all right. Damn. Goddamn. And here they are implying that the only reason God made black people is for sex, which, again, not so great. This wasn't helping him get to sleep. He turned again toward Grace again, and moved close to her warm body. He felt something he had never felt before. He felt that he would like to hold her, and be buried in her like a child, and never have to get up in the morning again and go downtown to face those faces. Good Christ, they were so ugly, and never have to enter that jailhouse again, and smell that smell, and hear that singing, never again feel that filthy, kinky, greasy hair under his hand, never again watch those black breasts leap against the leaping cattle prod, never hear those moans again, or watch that blood run down, or the fat lips split, or the sealed eyes struggle open. They were animals. They were no better than animals. What could be done with people like that? Here they had been in a civilized country for years, and they still lived like animals. Their houses were dark, with oilcloth or cardboard in the windows. The smell was enough to make you puke your guts out, and there they sat, a whole tribe, pumping out kids, it looked like, every damn 5 minutes, and laughing and talking and playing music like they didn't have a care in the world, and he reckoned they didn't neither, coming to the door into the sunlight, just standing there, just looking foolish, not thinking of anything but just getting back to what they were doing, saying, "Yes, Mr. Jesse, I surely will, Mr. Jesse. Fine weather, Mr. Jesse. Why, I thank you, Mr. Jesse." He had worked for a mail-order house for a while, and it had been his job to collect the payments for the stuff they bought. They were too dumb to know that they were being cheated blind, but that was no skin off his ass. He was just supposed to do his job. And here we're going to pause and think about this also, because even if they knew they were getting cheated, what could they do about it? They would be late, they didn't have the sense to put money aside, but it was easy to scare them, and he never really had any trouble. Hell, they all liked him. The kids used to smile when he came to the door. He gave them candy sometimes, or chewing gum, and rubbed their rough bullet heads. Maybe the candy should have been poisoned. Those kids were grown now. He had had trouble with one of them today. There was this blank today, he said, and stopped. His voice sounded peculiar. He touched Grace. "You awake?" he asked. She mumbled something, impatiently. She was probably telling him to go to sleep. It was all right. He knew that he was not alone. "What a funny time," he said, "to be thinking about a thing like that. You listening?" She mumbled something again. He rolled over on his back. "This Blank's one of the ringleaders. We had trouble with him before. We must have had him out there at the work farm 3 or 4 times. Well, Big Jim C. and some of the boys really had to whip that Blank's ass today." He looked over at Grace. He could not tell whether she was listening or not. He was afraid to ask again. They had this line, to register. He laughed, but she did not. And they wouldn't stay where Big Jim C wanted them. No, they had to start blocking traffic all around the courthouse, so couldn't nothing or nobody get through, and Big Jim C told them to disperse, and they wouldn't move. They just kept up that singing, and Big Jim C figured that the others would move if this blank would move, him being the ringleader, but he wouldn't move, and he wouldn't let the others move, so they had to beat him and a couple of the others, and they threw them in the wagon. But I didn't see this blank until I got to the jail. They were still singing, and I was supposed to make them stop. Well, I couldn't make them stop for me, but I knew he could make them stop. He was lying on the ground, jerking and moaning. They had threw him in a cell by himself, and blood was coming out his ears from where Big Jim C and his boys had whipped him. I think in this term whipped means pistol whipped. When you think they'd learn? I put the prod to him, and he jerked some more, and he kind of screamed, but he didn't have much voice left. You make them stop that singing, I said to him. You hear me? You make them stop that singing. He acted like he didn't hear me, and I put it to him again, under his arms, and he just rolled around on the floor, and blood started coming from his mouth. He'd pissed his pants already. He paused. His mouth felt dry, and his throat was as rough as sandpaper. As he talked, he began to hurt all over with that peculiar excitement which refused to be released. And here in this short sentence, we see again that the talk of dominating specifically a black person, somebody they deem less than human, and exercising violence upon them is making him sexually excited. You all are going to stop your singing, I said to him, and you are going to stop coming down to the courthouse and disrupting traffic and molesting the people and keeping us from our duties and keeping doctors from getting to sick white women and getting all them northerners in this town to give our town a bad name. And here specifically we also see the frail white woman that has to be protected from the foreign monster or the black person trope, the sad reality that a lot of the excuse of white women being in danger or being hurt was used to hurt and kill a lot of black people. As he said this, he kept prodding the boy, sweat pouring from beneath the helmet he had not yet taken off. The boy rolled around in his own dirt and water and blood and tried to scream again as the prod hit his testicles, but the scream did not come out, only a kind of rattle and a moan. He stopped. He was not supposed to kill the blank. The cell was filled with a terrible odor. The boy was still. You hear me, he called. You've had enough. The singing went on. You had enough? His foot leapt out. He had not known it was going to, and caught the boy flush on the jaw. Jesus, he thought, this ain't no blank. This is a goddamn bull. And he screamed again. You had enough? You going to make them stop that singing now? But the boy was out, and he was shaking worse than the boy had been shaking. He was glad no one could see him. At the same time, he felt very close to a particular joy. Something deep in him and deep in his memory was stirred. But whatever was in his memory eluded him. He took off his helmet. He walked to the cell door. White man, said the boy from the floor behind him. He stopped. For some reason, he grabbed his privates. You remember old Julia? The boy said from the floor with his mouth full of blood and one eye barely open, glaring like the eye of a cat in the dark. My grandmother's name was Mrs. Julia Blossom. Mrs. Julia Blossom. You going to call our women by their right names yet? And those kids ain't going to stop singing. We going to keep on singing until every one of you miserable white mothers goes stark raving out of your minds. Then he closed the one eye. He spat blood. His head fell back against the floor. He looked down at the boy whom he had been seeing off and on for more than a year, and suddenly remembered him. Old Julia had been one of his mail-order customers, a nice old woman. He had not seen her for years. He supposed that she must be dead. He had walked into the yard. The boy had been sitting in a swing. He had smiled at the boy and asked, Old Julia home? The boy looked at him for a long time before he answered, Don't know old Julia live here. This is her house. I know her. She has lived here for years. The boy shook his head. You might know an old Julia someplace else, white man, but nobody by that name live here. He watched the boy. The boy watched him. The boy certainly wasn't more than 10. White man. He didn't have time to be fooling around with some crazy kid. He yelled, Hey, Old Julia, but only silence answered him. The expression on the boy's face did not change. The sun beat down on them both, still and silent. He had the feeling that he had been caught up in a nightmare dreamed by a child, perhaps one of the nightmares he himself had dreamed as a child. It had that feeling. Everything familiar, without undergoing any other change, had been subtly and hideously displaced. The trees, the sun, the patches of grass in the yard, the leaning porch and the weary porch steps, and the cardboard in the windows, and the black hole of the door which looked like an entrance to a cave, and the eyes of the pickaninny, all were charged with malevolence. White man. He looked at the boy. She's gone out? The boy said nothing. Well, he said, tell her I passed by, and I'll pass by next week. He started to go. He stopped. You want some chewing gum? The boy got down from the swing and started for the house. He said, I don't want nothing you got, white man. He walked into the house and closed the door behind him. Now the boy looked as though he were dead. Jessie wanted to go over to him and pick him up and pistol whip him until the boy's head burst open like a melon. He began to tremble with what he believed was rage. Sweat, both cold and hot, raced down his body, the singing filling him as though it were a weird, uncontrollable, monstrous howling rumbling up from the depths of his own belly. He felt an icy fear rise in him and raise him up, and he shouted, he howled, you lucky we pump some white blood into you every once in a while. You are women. Here's what I got for all the black bitches in the world. Then he was, abruptly, almost too weak to stand. To his bewilderment, his horror, beneath his own fingers, he felt himself violently stiffen, with no warning at all. He dropped his hands and he stared at the boy, and he left the cell. All that singing they do, he said. All that singing. He could not remember the first time he had heard it. He had been hearing it all his life. It was the sound with which he was most familiar, though it was also the sound of which he had been least conscious, and it had always contained an obscure comfort. They were singing to God. They were singing for mercy, and they hoped to go to heaven. And he had even sometimes felt, when looking into the eyes of some of the old women, a few of the very old men, that they were singing for mercy for his soul, too. Another spot which I think is interesting is that he does attribute more kindness and compassion to the old men and women that he mentions here, the black old men and women that he's interacted with. He seems to think that they have accepted their place in society and will not provide him much resistance, and may even look upon him as a better. What I think was interesting about the old Julia interaction that he specifically remembers is, of course, that kid had to have learned that from someone. It's looking a lot like it might have been quote-unquote old Julia, who suddenly no longer responds to that. Again, interesting. Of course, he had never thought of their heaven, or what God was or could be for them. God was the same for everyone, he supposed, and heaven was where good people went. He supposed. He had never thought much about what it meant to be a good person. He tried to be a good person and treat everybody right. It wasn't his fault if the blanks had taken it into their heads to fight against God and go against the rules laid down in the Bible for everyone to read. Any preacher would tell you that. And this is a really good callback to times of slavery when, preachers would justify it with certain passages from the Bible, and then later on would still justify the oppression of black people with certain passages from the Bible that they had interpreted. It's a lot easier. It's so much easier to, oppress people, kill them, murder them, enslave them, when you are, quote-unquote, burdened with glorious purpose. He was only doing his duty, protecting white people from the blanks and the blanks from themselves, because remember, he thinks they're animals. And there were still lots of good blanks around. He had to remember that. They were all like that boy this afternoon, and the good blanks must be mighty sad to see what was happening to their people. Again, this is still rhetoric I see today, like that Oh, not all black people are stuck in poverty. Though some of them have managed to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and some of them are successful. And they must have seen like that. The only way they could get successful is to like break away from their like warped culture, blah blah blah, which is kind of similar to this rhetoric. They would thank him when this was over, and that way they had the best of them, not quite looking him in the eye, in a low voice with a little smile. We surely thanks you, Mr. Jesse. From the bottom of our hearts, we thanks you. He smiled. They hadn't all gone crazy. This trouble would pass. He knew that the young people had changed some of the words to the songs. He had scarcely listened to the words before, and he did not listen to them now, but he knew that the words were different. He could hear that much. And that is also an interesting point because he used to view the music as slightly comforting. It's something that's been with him all his life. Because now the music of that subjugation and oppression has changed because people are now starting to actively revolt against the status quo. He did not know if the faces were different. He had never, before this trouble began, watched them as they sang, but he certainly did not like what he saw now. They hated him, and this hatred was blacker than their hearts, blacker than their skins, redder than their blood, and harder by far than his club. Each day, each night, he felt worn out, aching, with their smell in his nostrils and filling his lungs as though he were drowning in blanks. And it was all to be done again when he awoke. It would never end. It would never end. Perhaps this was what the singing had meant all along. They had not been singing black folks into heaven. They had been singing white folks into hell. Again, I just love the phrasing of this. And kind of like that realization that, that maybe even those who appeared compliant, who appeared to be following the status quo, maybe they weren't. Everyone felt this black suspicion in many ways, but no one knew how to express it. Men much older than he, who had been responsible for law and order much longer than he, were now much quieter than they had been, and the tone of their jokes, in a way that he could not quite put his finger on, had changed. These men were his models. They had been friends to his father, and they had taught him what it meant to be a man. He looked to them for courage now. It wasn't that he didn't know what he was doing was right. He knew that. Nobody had to tell him that. It was only that he missed the ease of former years. But they didn't have much time to hang out with each other these days. They tended to stay close to their families every free minute because nobody knew what might happen next. Explosions rocked the night of their tranquil town. Each time, each man wondered silently if perhaps this time the dynamite had not fallen into the wrong hands. They thought that they knew where all the guns were, but they could not possibly know every move that was made in that secret place where the darkies live. Sorry, friends, I completely did not register that as I was saying it. Ugh. Where the blanks lived. From time to time, it was suggested that they form a posse and search the home of every blank, but they hadn't done it yet. For one thing, for another, although the blanks were scattered throughout the town, down in the hollow near the railroad tracks, way west near the mills, up on the hill the well-off ones, and some out near the college, nothing seemed to happen in one part of the town without the blanks immediately knowing it in the other. This meant they could not take them by surprise. They rarely mentioned it, but they knew that some of the blanks had guns. It stood to reason, as they said, since after all some of them had been in the army. There were blanks in the army right now, and God knows they wouldn't have any trouble stealing this half-assed government blind. The whole world was doing it. Look at the European countries and all those countries in Africa. So, what they're kind of showing here is another, like, it's an interesting kind of argument that they're scared of having a more physical insurrection as well as a social insurrection from the black people in their town, that they are frightened of the one or two possible guns among all of their citizens versus probably every single one of them on the police force having one. Again, interesting. They made jokes about it, bitter jokes, and they cursed the government in Washington, which had betrayed them, but they had not yet formed a posse. Now, if their town had been laid out like some towns in the north, where all the blanks lived together in one locality, they could have gone down and set fire to the houses and brought about peace that way. If the blanks had all lived in one place, they could have kept the fire in one place. But the way this town was laid out, the fire could hardly be controlled. It would spread all over town, and the blanks would probably be helping it to spread. Still, from time to time, they spoke of doing it anyway. So that now there was a real fear among them that somebody might go crazy and light the match. We're pausing to take a drink, guys. Okay, so the reason I highlighted this sentence of they made jokes about the government in Washington, which had betrayed them, because that's, again, a very, still to this day, common theme of we have been betrayed by the government, and all sorts of groups of people, to be honest, like, not just one specific group, but there's still this underlying, like, resentment that, like, well, if the government's not going to take care of it, we have to do it ourselves. And that's always the kind of terrifying, risky thing about taking the law into your own hands, is that things like this story happen, is that things happen that nobody, or at least most people, don't want. They rarely mentioned anything not directly related to the war that they were fighting, but this had failed to establish between them the unspoken communication of soldiers during a war. Each man, in the thrilling silence which sped outward from their exchanges, their laughter and their anecdotes, seemed wrestling, in various degrees of darkness, with a secret which he could not articulate to himself, and which, however directly it related to the war, related yet more surely to his privacy and his past. They could no longer be sure, after all, that they had all done the same things. So again, there's this whole kind of like silent war being fought between the police and the black people of this town. Of course, the black versus white social dilemma. But here they make a point of pointing out that not every single white person in the force might have done the exact same terrible things, might have done the same terrible things that others of them had. And so there's this fear of telling each other about either what they have or have not done, and thus being exposed. They had never dreamed that their privacy could contain any element of terror, could threaten, that is, to reveal itself to the scrutiny of a judgment day, while remaining unreadable and inaccessible to themselves, nor had they dreamed that the past, while certainly refusing to be forgotten, could yet so stubbornly refuse to be remembered. They felt themselves mysteriously set at naught, as no longer entering into the real concerns of other people, while here they were outnumbered, fighting to save the civilized world. They had thought that people would care. People didn't care, not enough anyway, to help them. And yet again, this is another interesting sentiment that's still expressed by groups of people that believe they've been wronged or forgotten or left behind by the government or even the populace at large, that they're fighting for something, and yet they're fighting to save everyone from whatever this threat is, but people don't care. People are okay with things changing as long as it doesn't affect them too much, and they're living with that shock. It would have been a help, really, or at least a relief, even to have been forced to surrender. Thus they had lost, probably forever, their old and easy connection with each other. They were forced to depend on each other more, and at the same time, to trust each other less. Who could tell when one of them might not betray them all, for money or for the ease of confession? But no one dared imagine what there might be to confess. They were soldiers fighting a war, but their relationship to each other was that of accomplices in a crime. They all had to keep their mouths shut. And here's the true reality of people who think they're fighting some sort of war, they're fighting for a cause, they are using bad methods, they're acting in bad faith to accomplish these supposedly lofty goals. They are becoming accomplices in crime. They cannot rat each other out because they're all implicated in terrible things. Perhaps not quite as terrible as what we're about to read, but still pretty bad nonetheless. If you have to partake in less than legal actions to get your point across, to get people to help you, you might not be fighting the right way or even fighting for the right cause at all. I stepped in the river at Jordan. Out of the darkness of the room, out of nowhere, the line came flying up at him with the melody and the beat. He turned wordlessly towards his sleeping wife. I stepped in the river at Jordan. Where had he heard that song? Grace, he whispered, you awake? She did not answer. If she was awake, she wanted him to sleep. Her breathing was slow and easy. Her body slowly rose and fell. I stepped in the river at Jordan. The water came to my knees. He began to sweat. He felt an overwhelming fear, which yet contained a curious and dreadful pleasure. I stepped in the river at Jordan. The water came to my waist. It had been night, as it was now. He was in the car between his mother and his father, sleepy, his head in his mother's lap, sleepy and yet full of excitement. The singing came from far away, across the dark fields. There were no lights anywhere. They had said goodbye to all the others and turned off on this dark dirt road. They were almost home. I stepped in the river at Jordan. The water came over my head. I looked way over to the other side. He was making up my dying bed. I guess they're singing for him, his father said, seeming very weary and subdued now. Even when they're sad, they sound like they're just about to go and tear off a piece. He yawned and leaned across the boy and slapped his wife lightly on the shoulder, allowing his hand to rest there for a moment. Don't they? Don't talk that way, she said. Well, that's what we're going to do, he said. You can make up your mind to that. He started whistling, you see? When I begin to feel it, I gets kind of musical, too. Oh, Lord, come on and ease my troubling mind. He had a black friend his age, 8, who lived nearby. His name was Otis. They wrestled together in the dirt. Now the thought of Otis made him sick. He began to shiver. His mother put her arm around him. He's tired, she said. We'll be home soon, said his father. He began to whistle again. We didn't see Otis this morning, Jessie said. He did not know why he said this. His voice in the darkness of the car sounded small and accusing. You haven't seen Otis for a couple of mornings, his mother said. That was true, but he was only concerned about this morning. No, said his father. I reckon Otis's folks was afraid to let him show himself this morning. But Otis didn't do nothing. Now his voice sounded questioning. Otis can't do something, said his father. He's too little. The car lights picked up their wooden house, which now solemnly approached them, the lights falling around it like yellow dust. Their dog, chained to a tree, began to bark. We just want to make sure Otis don't do nothing, said his father, and stopped the car. He looked down at Jessie. Can you tell him what your daddy said, you hear? Yes, sir, he said. His father switched off the lights. The dog moaned and pranced, but they ignored him and went inside. He could not sleep. He lay awake, hearing the night sounds, the dog yawning and moaning outside, the song of the crickets, the cry of the owl, dogs barking far away, then no sounds at all, just the heavy, endless buzzing of the night. The darkness pressed on his eyelids like a scratchy blanket. He turned again. He wanted to call his mother, but he knew his father would not like this. He was terribly afraid. Then he heard his father's voice in the other room, low, with a joke in it, but this did not help him. It frightened him even more. He knew what was going to happen. He put his head under the blanket, then pushed his head out again for fear, staring at the dark window. He heard his mother's moan, his father's sigh. He gritted his teeth. Then their bed began to rock. His father's breathing seemed to fill the world. That morning, before the sun had gathered all its strength, men and women, some flushed and some pale with excitement, came with news. Jesse's father seemed to know what the news was before the first jalopy stopped in the yard and he ran out crying. They got him then? They got him? The first jalopy held 8 people, 3 men and 2 women, and 3 children. The children were sitting on the laps of the grown-ups. Jesse knew 2 of them, the 2 boys. They shyly and uncomfortably greeted each other. He did not know the girl. Yes, they got him, said one of the women, the older one, who wore a wide hat and a fancy, faded blue dress. They found him early this morning. How far had he got? Jesse's father asked. He hadn't got no further than Harkness, one of the men said. Looked like he got lost up there in all them trees, or maybe he just got so scared he couldn't move. They all laughed. Yes, you know it's near a graveyard, too, said the younger woman, and they laughed again. Is that where they got him now? Asked Jesse's father. By this time there were 3 cars piled behind the first one, with everyone looking excited and shining, and Jesse noticed that they were carrying food. It was like a 4th of July picnic. Yeah, that's where he is, said one of the men. Declare, Jesse, you going to keep us here all day, answering your damn fool questions? Come on, we ain't got no time to waste. Don't bother putting up no food, cried a woman from one of the other cars. We got enough. Just come on. Why, thank you, said Jesse's father. We'd be right along then. I better get a sweater for the boy, said his mother, in case it turns cold. Jesse watched his mother's thin legs cross the yard. He knew that she also wanted to comb her hair a little, and maybe put on a better dress, the dress she wore to church. His father guessed this too, for he yelled behind her, Now don't you go trying to turn yourself into no movie star. You just come on. But he laughed as he said this and winked at the men. His wife is younger and prettier than most of the other women. He clapped Jesse on the head and started pulling him toward the car. You all go on, he said. I'll be right behind you. Jesse, you go tie up that there dog while I get this car started. The car sputtered and coughed and shook. The caravan began to move. Bright dust filled the air. As soon as he was tied up, the dog began to bark. Jesse's mother came out of the house, carrying a jacket for his father and a sweater for Jesse. She had put a ribbon in her hair and had an old shawl around her shoulders. Put these in the car, son, she said, and handed everything to him. She went down and stroked the dog, looked to see if there was water in his bowl, then went back up the 3 porch steps and closed the door. Come on, said his father. Ain't nothing in there for nobody to steal. He was sitting in the car, but the sound of singing floated behind them. Jesse got into the car, sitting close to his father, loving the smell of the car and the trembling, and the bright day and the sense of going on a great and unexpected journey. His mother got in and closed the door and the car began to move. Not until then did he ask, Where are we going? Are we going on a picnic? He had a feeling that he knew where they were going, but he was not sure. That's right, his father said. We're going on a picnic. You won't ever forget this picnic. Are we, he asked after a moment, going to see the bad blank, the one that knocked down old Miss Standish? Well, I reckon, said his mother, that we might see him. He started to ask, Will a lot of blanks be there? Will Otis be there? But he did not ask his question, to which, in a strange and uncomfortable way, he already knew the answer. Their friends in the other cars stretched up the road as far as he could see. Other cars had joined them. There were cars behind them. They were singing. The sun suddenly seemed very hot, and he was at once very happy and a little afraid. He did not understand what was happening, and he did not know what to ask. He had no one to ask. He had grown accustomed, for the solution of such mysteries, to go to Otis. He felt that Otis knew everything, but he could not ask Otis about this. Anyway, he had not seen Otis for 2 days. He had not seen a black face anywhere for more than 2 days, and he now realized as they began trekking up the long hill, which eventually led to Harkness, that there were no black faces on the road this morning. No black faces, no black people anywhere. From the houses in which they lived, all along the road, no smoke curled and no life stirred. Gotta pause and take another drink, I'm sorry. Maybe 1 or 2 chickens were to be seen, that was all. There was no one at the windows, no one in the yard, no one sitting on the porches, and the doors were closed. He had come this road many a time, and see women washing in the yard. There were no clothes on the clotheslines. Men working in the fields, children playing in the dust. Black men passed them on the road, other mornings, other days, on foot or in wagons, sometimes in cars, tipping their hats, smiling, joking, their teeth a solid white against their skin, their eyes as warm as the sun, the blackness of their skin like dull fire against the white or the blue or the gray of their torn clothes. They passed the blank church, dead white, desolate, locked up, in the graveyard where no one knelt or walked, and he saw no flowers. He wanted to ask, Where are they? Where are they all? But he did not dare. As the hill grew steeper, the sun grew colder. He looked at his mother and his father. They looked straight ahead, seeming to be listening to the singing which echoed and echoed in this graveyard silence. They were strangers to him now. They were looking at something he could not see. His father's lips had a strange, cruel curve. He wet his lips from time to time and swallowed. He was terribly aware of his father's tongue. It was as though he had never seen it before, and his father's body suddenly seemed immense, bigger than a mountain. His eyes, which were gray-green, looked yellow in the sunlight, or at least there was a light in them, which he had never seen before. His mother patted her hair and adjusted the ribbon, leaning forward to look into the car mirror. "You look all right," said his father, and laughed. "When that blank looks at you, he's going to swear he threw his life away for nothing. Wouldn't be surprised if he didn't come back to haunt you," and he laughed again. The singing now slowly began to cease, and he realized they were nearing their destination. They had reached a straight, narrow, pebbly road with trees on either side. The sunlight filtered down on them from a great height as though they were under water, and the branches of the trees scraped against the cars with a tearing sound. To the right of them and beneath them, invisible now, lay the town, and to the left miles of trees which led to the high mountain range which his ancestors had crossed in order to settle in this valley. Now all was silent except for the bumping of the tires against the rocky road, the sputtering of motors, and the sound of a crying child. They seemed to move more slowly. They were beginning to climb again. He watched the cars ahead as they toiled patiently upwards, disappearing into the sunlight of the clearing. Presently he felt their vehicle also rise, heard his father's changed breathing. The sunlight hit his face, the trees moved away from them, and they were there. As their car crossed the clearing, he looked around. There seemed to be millions. There were certainly hundreds of people in the clearing, staring towards something he could not see. There was a fire. He could not see the flames, but he smelled the smoke. Then they were on the other side of the clearing, among the trees again. His father drove off the road and parked the car behind a great many other cars. He looked down at Jessie. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes, sir," he said. "Well, come on, then," his father said. He reached over and opened the door on his mother's side. His mother stepped out first. They followed her into the clearing. At first he was aware only of confusion, of his mother and father greeting and being greeted, himself being handled, hugged, and patted, and told how much he had grown. The wind blew the smoke from the fire across the clearing into his eyes and nose. He could not see over the backs of the people in front of him. The sounds of laughing and cursing and wrath and something else rolled in waves from the front of the mob to the back. Those in front expressed their delight at what they saw, and this delight rolled backward, wave upon wave, across the clearing, more acrid than the smoke. And here we're starting to see what this really is, and the start of the mob mentality and this lust for violence and blood that fills this crowd. And even more, we see the cultural implications of celebrating this, treating this like a holiday. Everybody's dressing up. People bring food to this. It's entertainment, which is horrifying in a way that you don't really get. His father reached down suddenly and sat Jessie on his shoulders. Okay, friends, that is the end of the paragraph, and again, we are about to get into, besides all the sex talk, explicit violence. Explicit. This is, in my estimation, more explicit than Invisible Man. There's graphic descriptions of just all sorts of violence, dead bodies with details. Okay? If you can't do that, if you want to know about, that is fine. Please preserve your sense of sanity, your whatever you need today, guys. This will definitely be a real downer. Now that it hasn't been already. Even more depressing than it already has been. Okay. Now he saw the fire of twigs and boxes piled high. Flames made pale orange and yellow and thin as a veil under the steadier light of the sun. Gray-blue smoke rolled upward and poured over their heads. Beyond the shifting curtain of fire and smoke, he made out first only a length of gleaming chain, attached to a great limb of the tree. Then he saw that this chain bound two black hands together at the wrist, dirty yellow palm facing dirty yellow palm. The smoke poured up, the hands dropped out of sight, a cry went up from the crowd. Then the hands slowly came into view again, pulled upward by the chain. This time he saw the kinky, sweating, bloody head. He had never before seen a head with so much hair on it, hair so black and so tangled that it seemed like another jungle. The head was hanging. He saw the forehead flat and high, with a kind of arrow of hair in the center, just like he had, just like his father had. Again, a mental, like, I wouldn't say image, but like, again, an explicit connection between white people and black people that instead is used against them. They called it a widow's peak, and the mangled eyebrows, the wide nose, the closed eyes, and the glistening eyelashes, and the hanging lips, all streaming with blood and sweat. His hands were straight above his head. All his weight pulled downward from his hands, and he was a big man, a bigger man than his father, and black as an African jungle cat, and naked. This is just going to be my final warning, guys, but explicit and graphic violence and imagery, okay? Do not continue if you can't take it. Jesse pulled upward. His father's hands held him firmly by the ankles. He wanted to say something, he did not know what, but nothing he said could have been heard, for now the crowd roared again as a man stepped forward and put more wood on the fire. The flames leapt up. He thought he heard the hanging man scream, but he was not sure. Sweat was pouring from the hair in his armpits, poured down his side over his chest, into his navel and his groin. He was lowered again, he was raised again. Now Jesse knew that he heard him scream. The head went back, the mouth wide open, blood bubbling from the mouth. The veins of the neck jumped out. Jesse clung to his father's neck in terror as the cry rolled over the crowd. The cry of all the people rose to answer the dying man's cry. He wanted death to come quickly. They wanted to make death wait. And it was they who held death now on a leash, which they lengthened little by little. And here is the direct comparison, and even more direct thought of taking justice into your own hands is always dangerous and dirty. And there is something wrong with a society that celebrates something like this, that turns it into a fun event. And especially for someone whose crime, supposedly, is bumping into an old lady. What did he do, Jesse wondered. What did the man do? What did he do? But he could not ask his father. He was seated on his father's shoulders, but his father was far away. There were two older men, friends of his father's, raising and lowering the chain. Everyone, indiscriminately, seemed to be responsible for the fire. There was no hair left on the Blanks' privates, and the eyes now were wide open, as white as the eyes of a clown or doll. The smoke now carried a terrible odor across the clearing, the odor of something burning which was both sweet and rotten. He turned his head a little and saw the field of faces. He watched his mother's face. Her eyes were very bright, her mouth was open. She was more beautiful than he had ever seen her, and more strange. He began to feel a joy he had never felt before. He watched the hanging, gleaming body, the most beautiful and terrible object he had ever seen till then. One of his father's friends reached up, and in his hands he held a knife, and Jesse wished that he had been that man. And here we see with these people who are his parents becoming strangers, with these people who are becoming almost high and like exhilarated. That's not what I'm looking for. These people that are entranced and transformed into something else through this experience. And here even it says that his mother was more beautiful than he had ever seen her in this moment, with the kind of energy that she's getting from this crowd and that she herself is putting off because she's enjoying this. It also kind of is implied that everybody's really turned on by this, which is strange. It was a long, bright knife, and the sun seemed to catch it, to play with it, to caress it. It was brighter than the fire. And a wave of laughter swept the crowd. Jesse felt his father's hand on his ankle slip and tighten. The man with the knife walked toward the crowd, smiling slightly, as though this were a signal. Silence fell. He heard his mother cough. Then the man with the knife walked up to the hanging body. He turned and smiled again. Now there was a silence all over the field. The hanging head looked up. It seemed fully conscious now, as though the fire had burned out terror and pain. The man with the knife took the blanks privates in his hand, one hand still smiling, as though he were weighing them. In the cradle of the one white hand, the blanks private seemed as remote as meat being weighed in the scales, but seemed heavier too, much heavier, and Jesse felt his scrotum tighten, and huge, much bigger than his father's, flaccid, hairless, the largest thing he had ever seen till then, and the blackest. The white hand stretched them, cradled them, caressed them. Then the dying man's eyes looked straight into Jesse's eyes. It could not have been as long as a second, but it seemed longer than a year. Then Jesse screamed, and the crowd screamed, as the knife flashed first up, then down, cutting the dreadful thing away, and the blood came roaring down. Then the crowd rushed forward, tearing at the body with their hands, with knives, with rocks, with stones, howling and cursing. Jesse's head, of its own weight, fell downward toward his father's head. Someone stepped forward and drenched the body with kerosene. Where the man had been, a great sheet of flame appeared. Jesse's father lowered him to the ground. And here as well we have the distinct image of a white man emasculating a black man, explicitly showing that through the oppression and subjugation of the black people that they are indeed emasculated and rendered defunct. That's not what I was saying. Impotent, and rendered impotent because of how they are treated and viewed. Additionally, something I hadn't really thought about before, but rereading this again, this entire scene is written almost like, well, I guess the lead up to an orgasm. The way the people are starting to feel something, they're all excited, they're all kind of panting with anticipation and the build up to the big event, which then releases all of the energy at once. This seems written like a climax, which is also interesting. Oh, sorry, that every time I think of this story, I just picture that part. Okay, we're going on. Well, I told you, said his father, you wasn't never going to forget this picnic. His father's face was full of sweat, his eyes were very peaceful. At that moment Jesse loved his father more than he had ever loved him. He felt that his father had carried him through a mighty test, had revealed to him a great secret which would be the key to his life forever. And so now, of course, because Jesse's so young, we have intricately tied this release of great energy and build-up to the emasculation and domination of black people. I reckon, he said. I reckon. Jesse's father took him by the hand, and, with his mother a little behind them, talking and laughing with the other women, they walked through the crowd across the clearing. The black body was on the ground. The chain which had held it was being rolled up by one of his father's friends. Whatever the fire had left undone, the hands and the knives and the stones of the people had accomplished. The head was caved in, one eye was torn out, one ear was hanging, but one had to look carefully to realize this, for it was now merely a black charred object on the black charred ground. He lay spread-eagled with what had been a wound between what had been his legs. And here we kind of get just this instant rush and release of anger, and then they're satiated, they've been placated, until next time somebody makes them mad, until next time they have an excuse to do this. Also, I thought was interesting is that immediately they're like cleaning up and people are dispersing, almost like after a band concert or like a school event. Like that's what I'm picturing, like after a football game. Because this really was just some sort of entertainment for the town. They going to leave him here then? Jesse whispered. Yeah, said his father. They'll come and get him by and by. I reckon we better get over there and get some of that food before it's all gone. And here it's the strong implication that the black people of this community, who were notably missing for the past 2 days because they didn't want to get caught up in the bloodlust and fervor that all these people seem to have, are then forced to come get the remains of their loved ones, their friends, the people of their community that these white people have just casually picked and then tortured to death because it's a warning. I reckon, he muttered now to himself. I reckon. Grace stirred and touched him on the thigh. The moonlight covered her like glory. Something bubbled up in him. His nature again returned to him. He thought of the boy in the cell. He thought of the man in the fire. He thought of the knife and grabbed himself and stroked himself, and a terrible sound, something between a high laugh and a howl, came out of him and dragged his sleeping wife up on one elbow. She stared at him in a moonlight which had now grown cold as ice. He thought of the morning and grabbed her, laughing and crying, crying and laughing, and he whispered as he stroked her, as he took her, "Come on, sugar. I'm going to do you like a blank, just like a blank. Come on, sugar, and let me love you, just like you'd love a blank." He thought of the morning as he labored, and she moaned, thought of morning as he labored harder than he ever had before, and before his labors had ended, he heard the first cock crow, and the dogs begin to bark, and the sound of tires on the gravel road. And here we see the explicit tie of sexual accomplishment from domination of other beings, from the emasculation of other black men, of proving another race impotent, which I think, again, is such an interesting argument, not even argument, but an interesting point to make, that sometimes it really is it is about domination, and it is about proving your virility over somebody else's, and it's such a weird turn, but such a the story just slams you in the face with everything you don't want to think about too closely, to be honest. So I think that this story is indeed still applicable today. Hopefully not in expressly this treatment, but I still see a lot of common themes with like the subtle implications in this story and how we still can treat others in our country and others in our community, and how some ideologies can be formed and carried out as long as you have enough people there with you. And nowadays especially, it's even easier with social media because you can find like-minded people with the press of a button. So we do really need to keep that in mind when we're on social media. That sometimes being stuck in an echo chamber is not a good thing. It can drag you to extremes. It can make you do things you wouldn't think yourself capable of. Of course, I'm not saying we're all going to start murdering people. I'm just saying ideologically you might be pushed pretty far. And again, this story is so powerful. I never had to read a lot of important black literature. I don't think we ever had to read anything at all during high school that I can remember. We just mostly, I guess we did read Othello, but that was more of my teacher's personal pick from the different Shakespeare works they had to do, and Othello isn't quite down the white supremacy path. It is partially because it's the main reason why some people don't like Othello. But this and Invisible Man, they were two such things that really made me kind of like go, oh, okay. Because we looked at the history of lynchings, and they're just horrific, honestly, and they're truly what. Because I mean, I knew that I wasn't supposed to say the N-word. Like, that was something I learned and something I knew. But I didn't quite fully understand why. I just knew that it was offensive to people. But reading these books, I was just like, oh yeah, okay, this is why. Yeah, I 100% understand. And now when I hear the N-word, all I can think of is the scene with the guy getting his privates removed. It's quite uncomfortable. And it just instantly brings back all of the history and the weight of that world. Of having people be treated as animals and second-class citizens, and being seen as things that could only learn through violence, which again is terrible. So if you made it all the way through this video, thank you, congratulations. I'm glad that me reading this again has done something. It's definitely not something I enjoy reading. I can enjoy the crafting of it. I can appreciate how it makes me feel terrible every inch of it. Because that's hard to do. And again, I can do gore, but I can't do this kind of gore, buddy. And I don't know what I'm trying to say. It's a lot, guys. I've been kind of nervous about reading Invisible Man, and especially going to meet the man on my channel, but I do think it's good to, in between things that I enjoy and recommend to people, I think it's good to also read just important literature. And I definitely think this is important. It's Black voices speaking on Black experience, or metaphors for Black experiences, and they're saying something important that I think everybody should listen to. So, again, thanks for making it through this video. Next week, on Wednesday, I'll be posting a book review of Into the Land of the Unicorns. If you watch this video all the way through the end, feel free to leave me improvements, comments, your reaction to the story. Have you read this story before? Let me know. Subscribe if you want to see more book readings and book reviews from me. And Scholastically Natalie is out.